You hear it before you feel it. A thin, high-pitched whine circling somewhere near your ear in the dark. You swat, you miss. It lands somewhere on your skin you cannot see, and by the time you feel the bite, it is already gone, carrying away a small amount of your blood and possibly something far more dangerous than an itch. Your ancestors heard that same sound for hundreds of thousands of years, and unlike almost every other threat they faced, the predators, the cold, the hunger, this one was small enough to ignore and lethal enough to kill. The mosquito may be the single most significant predator in human history, and your ancestors fought a war against it for nearly the entire span of human existence. This is not an exaggeration. Researchers studying the history of infectious disease, including entomologist Timothy Weingard, whose work traces the mosquito's role across human history, have argued that mosquito-borne disease has killed more humans than every war, famine, and other pestilence combined. Malaria alone, transmitted exclusively by mosquito bite, is estimated to have killed somewhere between half and the entirety of all humans who have ever lived, depending on which historical model you use. No lion, no winter, no rival band ever came close to that number. Start with the biology your ancestors didn't understand but had to survive anyway. Female mosquitoes, only females bite, since they need the protein in blood to develop their eggs, are drawn to carbon dioxide, body heat, and certain chemical signatures in human sweat. They can detect a breathing human from many meters away. Once a mosquito carrying the malaria parasite, or the viruses behind diseases like yellow fever and dengue, bites a person, that pathogen enters the bloodstream directly, bypassing almost every external defense the human body has. There was no way to see the threat coming. There was no way to fight it directly. The only options were prevention, avoidance, and, eventually, adaptation written directly into the human genome. Let's start with prevention, because the evidence here is older and stranger than most people expect. Archaeologists studying ancient campsites across malaria-prone regions of Africa have found consistent evidence of fire use concentrated specifically around sleeping areas, far beyond what would be necessary for warmth or cooking alone. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner, whose extensive fieldwork among the hoansi san of the Kalahari has illuminated so much about hunter-gatherer life, has documented that fires were deliberately built up and maintained through the night, specifically because smoke disrupts mosquito flight patterns and repels them from sleeping areas. This wasn't accidental. Generations of trial and error had taught your ancestors a precise behavioral solution to an invisible problem. More smoke at dusk, when mosquito activity peaks, meant fewer bites, meant fewer deaths. Beyond fire, your ancestors developed an entire toolkit of botanical insect repellents long before anyone understood the chemistry behind why they worked. Ethnobotanist Cassandra Quave, who has spent her career documenting traditional plant-based medicine across cultures, has cataloged dozens of plants used by indigenous and traditional societies specifically to repel biting insects. Crushed leaves rubbed directly onto skin, certain woods burned for their smoke, oils extracted and applied before sleep. Many of these plants, tested in modern laboratories, contain compounds chemically similar to or even more effective than synthetic repellents developed in the 20th century. Your ancestors did not have a periodic table. They had millennia of careful observation. This plant works, that one doesn't. Pass it down. Shelter design itself became a defense mechanism. Anthropological surveys of traditional housing across malaria-endemic regions show consistent patterns. Homes built on raised platforms above standing water and ground-level insect activity. Sleeping areas positioned to maximize airflow and minimize stillness near walls where mosquitoes rest during the day. Woven barriers and meshes constructed from plant fiber long before the invention of mass-produced mosquito netting. None of this required understanding parasites or disease transmission. It required only the accumulated observation that certain arrangements of space correlated with fewer bites and fewer deaths. But prevention alone could not fully solve the problem, because mosquitoes are relentless and adaptable, and some exposure was simply unavoidable across an entire lifetime in malaria-endemic regions. This is where the story takes its most remarkable turn, because your ancestors' bodies began to change. Geneticist Sarah Tishkoff, whose research has mapped the genetic diversity of African populations in extraordinary detail, has documented some of the most dramatic examples of rapid human evolution ever recorded, virtually all of them connected to malaria resistance. The sickle cell trait is the most famous example. A single mutated copy of the hemoglobin gene distorts red blood cells into a crescent shape under low oxygen conditions, exactly the conditions the malaria parasite needs to thrive inside a cell. Carriers of one copy of this mutation gain significant protection against severe malaria. The cost is steep. 2 copies cause sickle cell disease, a serious and often life-shortening condition. But in regions where malaria killed a substantial percentage of children before adulthood, the math of evolution was brutal and clear. A trait that killed some people slowly, but protected far more people from dying quickly, spread through entire populations within a remarkably short evolutionary time frame. Among the fastest documented instances of human genetic change in response to environmental pressure. This was not the only adaptation. Thalassemia, a related blood disorder, provides similar partial protection in some populations and emerged independently across different malaria-endemic regions of the world: the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa. Each population arriving at a strikingly similar genetic solution to the same lethal problem, entirely independently, through nothing but generations of who survived and who did not. The Duffy-negative blood type, nearly universal among populations descended from West and Central Africa, provides near-complete resistance to one major species of malaria parasite by eliminating the specific protein the parasite uses to enter red blood cells. Researchers have traced this genetic adaptation back tens of thousands of years, coinciding precisely with the regions where that particular malaria species was most lethal. Your body, in other words, did not just adapt behaviorally to mosquitoes. In some human populations, it adapted at the molecular level, reshaping the very architecture of blood cells in response to a threat too small to see. Let's reconstruct what daily life actually looked like under this pressure. You are part of a community somewhere in equatorial Africa, roughly 10,000 years ago, in the early period after your ancestors began settling into permanent or semi-permanent villages near rivers and wetlands, exactly the habitats where mosquito populations explode. As dusk approaches, the high-pitched whine begins, faint at first, then unmistakable. Someone builds up the fire deliberately, adding green or damp wood specifically because it produces more smoke. Children are brought inside structures with walls woven tightly enough to slow, if not stop, the insects. Sleeping platforms are raised slightly off the ground. Certain leaves, crushed and rubbed on exposed skin, carry a sharp scent that you have learned, through nothing but repetition and survival, seems to keep the biting down, and still people are bitten. Still, some get sick. A fever that comes in waves, chills that alternate with burning heat. A sickness your community has seen take both the very young and the very old, again and again, for as long as anyone can remember. There is no cure. There is only the slow, brutal selection happening across generations. Those whose blood cells resist the parasite slightly better survive slightly more often and pass that resistance forward, while those without it do not. This is evolution not as an abstract concept in a textbook, but as a lived, repeated generational catastrophe, a filtering mechanism operating across thousands of years, written into the genetic code of entire populations because of an insect smaller than a fingernail. The consequences extended even further than biology. Historians studying the colonization and settlement patterns of malaria-endemic regions have noted that mosquito-borne disease shaped which populations could survive in which environments, influenced migration and settlement decisions, and in some documented historical cases, directly affected the outcomes of military campaigns when invading armies, lacking local genetic or acquired immunity, suffered catastrophic losses to disease rather than combat. The mosquito did not just kill individuals. It shaped the geography of human civilization itself, determining, in measurable and documented ways, where large stable populations could form and where they could not. Now consider your own relationship with this insect. You probably swat at one without much thought, mildly annoyed, mostly unbothered, because in much of the modern world, the deadly diseases mosquitoes once carried have been pushed back by sanitation, medication, and insecticides your ancestors could never have imagined. But the genetic legacy of that ancient war is still written inside you, or inside billions of people alive today, in the structure of their red blood cells, in inherited traits that exist for no other reason than that an insect once made survival a matter of microscopic cellular luck, the whine in the dark that makes you flinch, the reflexive swat before you've even consciously registered the sound. These are not modern irritations. They are echoes of an instinct sharpened across hundreds of thousands of years against the deadliest predator your species has ever faced, one that never needed teeth or claws or strength. It only ever needed to be small enough to go unnoticed and patient enough to wait. You'll probably be bitten again sometime soon. When you are, that small flash of irritation you feel, that too is ancient. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. What topic would you like me to explore next? Let me know in the comments below.